Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's public land duck hunting virtual class. It's presented to you by the Tennessee Wildlife Federation and the Hunting and Fishing Academy program. Tonight, we'll be discussing some tips and techniques for using Tennessee's public land resources for waterfowl hunting. As many of you have heard, there's a lot of proposals up in the air and being discussed right now. And we're not going to get too much into the proposals. I will be talking about the way the draw system currently works for the 60-day draw and the 3 and 4 day site draws. And even if things does change, the information I'm giving you here tonight will still be relevant. They're talking about a tier system, and each of these processes is going to fall somewhere into those tiers that's even in the proposals. So I am Chris Hearn. I'm the West Tennessee field rep with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. Born and raised in Jackson, Tennessee, and spent most of my life hunting public properties for waterfowl here. So I look forward to sharing some of the tips and tricks that I've learned over the years with you guys here tonight. Also on the call tonight is Taylor Martin. He's the manager of the Hunting and Fishing Academy. And Taylor, would you like to introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about the Zoom functions and the layout for the virtual class?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Chris. So, hey, everybody, like Chris said, I'm Taylor Martin. I'm the Hunting and Fishing Academy manager. Once again, I'd like to thank everybody for spending their Tuesday evenings with us by getting on here. But tonight, I'm kind of playing the role as IT person. Some of you may be familiar with Zoom or not, but we're going to have a lot. We're going to talk about a lot tonight. So if you ever have any questions throughout the entire webinar, please feel free to submit your questions. But it's a question for me and Chris. You can submit it to us in the Q&A function. That's the best way to make sure that we answer your question as it comes up. And then there's also the chat function, which you can put just about anything in the chat function, or if you want to ask a question directly to Chris or I and not have everybody else see it. But for general questions, that Q&A function is going to be the best option. And then throughout the course, we're going to have some polls that pop up. Chris will have a slide that corresponds to what we're asking, but we'll have something that pops up on screen to ask you a quick multiple choice question to answer. But other than that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chris.
All right, thanks, Taylor. So I want to start off by talking about the Tennessee Wildlife Federation and what it is we do. Being founded in 1946, it's one of the state's largest and oldest conservation nonprofits, and it's dedicated to the conservation, sound management, and the wise use of Tennessee's great outdoors. The Federation brings together and represents various interests of hunters, anglers, wildlife watchers, and other outdoors enthusiasts. Common sense conservation policy is at the heart of the Federation, and we represent those stakeholders on Capitol Hill. Through its habitat conservation program, the Federation is restoring and conserving thousands of acres of wildlife habitat. And there's lots of ways to get involved, from volunteering to taking action on policy. You can see all these opportunities at tnwf.org/get involved. Outside of our policy and conservation work, we also have several other programs. We have the Scholastic Clay Target program, and this is offered to kids from 9 up to college level. The kids have the option of shooting in multiple shotgun shooting disciplines. And currently there's about 1,700 kids across the state participating in that program. And then many of you might have heard about the Hunters for the Hungry program. And this feeds Tennesseans by providing venison to hunger relief organizations. Those deer are donated by hunters, and they're donated to processors that work with the program. And since 1998, over 7.6 million meals have been provided. And then that brings us to the Hunting and Fishing Academy program, and that's where I spend most of my time. So if you look at the North American conservation model, conservation dollars are generated through license sales and taxes on ammos and other outdoor equipment. So across the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a reduction in participation in hunting. And you can see the major problem with that is there's going to be a lack of funding for conservation as we go forward if we don't do something. So on a national level, there's been programs like the Hunting and Fishing Academy created to mimic that generational transfer and teach the kids kids and adults how to hunt and fish. So we not only teach you how to harvest game, but the entire process. So the field to table concept, and then we also focus on public land. So this virtual class here tonight on public land duck hunting fits right into our mission. I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about the way our season works. So you can see here that the last weekend of November, we had a 2-day split. So it was open for a Saturday and Sunday, and then it closed for 5 days, and then we opened back up on December 5th. And this is going to run through the end of January. So right now we're about 3 weeks into the season, trudging along now. And then February 6th and February 13th, 2 consecutive Saturdays after the 58-day closure, we're going to have a youth waterfowl hunt. So as Taylor had mentioned, we're going to have some pop-up surveys. And this is our first one. And these are just to give me an idea of your experience level. So how many times did you waterfowl hunt last year? And we're going to leave this up for about 10 to 15 seconds, give everybody a chance to answer, and then we'll move on. Great. This is great. It's spread across the board, but a lot of new hunters here tonight, and that's perfect. So if you'll take a look at the picture here of the North American migratory bird flyway, and you're looking at North America, you got 4 major flyways that waterfowl are going to use to migrate north to south. And in the yellow there, you'll see the Mississippi flyway is where we are. And the Mississippi flyway is probably one of the most waterfowl abundant flyways in the country. And then if you look over to the eastern part of Tennessee, you get the Atlantic flyway, and sometimes that'll offer a little bit of different species from the birds that's using the Mississippi flyway. So you might ask, well, how do you know how these birds are migrating? And that's where we collect this migration data through bird banding. Each bird is banded with a metal band that's specific identification number on it. And then by knowing where the bird was banded and then later where the bird was harvested, we're able to take these data points and create points on a map, which is what you see on the right. And you can actually see the way these birds are coming out of Canada from their nesting grounds and going down into, as the weather gets colder, going back down into the southern part of America. So here's our second question. In what area of the state do you primarily hunt? Great. Middle and East Tennessee representing tonight. So Tennessee varies greatly in habitat and topography from west to east. And I'm going to start out talking about West Tennessee and the habitat that it offers and how that relates to wintering waterfowl. So West Tennessee is home of the Mississippi floodplain. The Mississippi River in the winter, a lot of times, will get up and flood out of its banks. There is a lot of agriculture along the alluvial valley that will flood and becomes a great resting place for birds that's on the long migration. It also has lots of small rivers that eventually dump into the Mississippi, and lots of these rivers have agriculture that border them. And during a flood year, those will also flood. In West Tennessee, you'll have natural buckbrush and cypress oxbows. And then it would also be hard to talk about West Tennessee duck hunting without talking about Reelfoot Lake, that was created by an earthquake in 1812 and it's definitely a noteworthy stop for migrating waterfowl. It's got a chain of refuges around it, and it can hold upwards of 100,000 birds on a heavy migration year. As we go east, we'll go into Middle Tennessee, and some parts of Middle Tennessee are very similar to West Tennessee. You get into bigger rivers and bigger lakes. Also, man-made water control structures are there, and pictured on the right is a flashboard riser. So if you can imagine, those boards are how you would mandate your water level. As the water rises, if it tried to go over the boards, it would just go out and drain through your levee. So that's one way of flooding areas for waterfowl. The rivers in Middle Tennessee are a little less prone to flooding just because of the topography, and it don't have a big floodplain on both sides of the river like you do in West Tennessee, but there still is some areas that flood as rivers rise. And then you're starting to get into where farm ponds are an option to hunt. If you get some birds that's using a farm pond but as a loafing area during the day and things like that. And then we'll move on into East Tennessee. And then again, we've got farm ponds. The birds use them for loafing areas. They're going out and feeding in different places and spending time there to just kind of rest. If you find ground that's flat enough, man-made water control structures are again an option where you're going to build a levee and pump across the levee or catch rainwater and use those structures like we talked about, like a flashboard riser, to be able to mandate your water level. And then again, smaller rivers and streams, the topography is a little bit steeper, and then you're closer to the Atlantic flyway. And as I mentioned, this can give you some options of getting into some different species of birds. And normally in East Tennessee, there's a pretty good abundance of resident Canada geese and things like that that we lack over here in West Tennessee. So which of the following best describes you, just to give me a feel for how much you guys have hunted on public property? It's great, spread across the board and still reflective of a lot of new hunters. So I'm going to start out when I'm talking about finding public land resources in the state. And this is a map of our wildlife management areas. And this can be found on TWRA's website. This is a view that's zoomed out. You can see the whole state in this picture, and you can see those green blobs. Each of those green blobs is an individual wildlife management area, and it's managed specifically by that management area. So each one will have its own set of regulations. So if you look at the layer list, I like to stay pretty broad. It's got options of just waterfowl, but I want to just do hunting allowed. And then when I get into the area of the state where I'm wanting to find property to be able to hunt, then I can click on those wildlife management areas and get more information. So that's what I've done here. This is Cheatham WMA, and I've zoomed in on it. And now you can see where there's site draws, the blind draw locations on this map. It's got an option when you click on the WMA. It's got buy a license, which is going to link you back to the website to be able to purchase license. You got specific WMA information, which is very important. And then also it's going to link you back to the hunting and trapping guide to get your general waterfowl and general WMA regulations. Similar to the TWRA's interactive maps, here's the Tennessee Valley Authority interactive map. And this is particularly useful. You can see there along the Tennessee River system in Middle Tennessee. And then as you get out around Knoxville and go east, TBA land and these TBA undeveloped recreation lands are more prominent. And again, it is interactive, and I believe you can click on each one of those places and get a little bit more detail about the specifics. So river gauges are one of my most valuable tools when I'm picking locations to duck hunt. And these gauges will show flood levels and historic crests. And that's important just to kind of give you an idea of what to judge off of. So you can look there and you can see the different categories. And an action stage is normally when a river is starting to get close to its banks. And then flood stage, you have minor flooding and then all the way up into moderate and major flooding. But the biggest takeaway is through experience, you'll begin to understand how these gauges affect the areas that you hunt. So one of the things I do is I take detailed notes about the river stages and how it relates to my hunt. And here's just a little snippet of my daily journal entry. I'm going to have the date, I'm going to have the location that I'm hunting, I'm going to have a little bit about the weather, and then the water level at the closest river gauge that's going to pertain to my hunt. So in this case, it was the Paravel River gauge at the Tennessee River. And then I always like to put just a little bit about the events of the hunt, and then something in the bottom that's I can relate back to as far as how the water was relative to the hunt. So the water was just over the stump on the point. So maybe there was a certain place out there by the decoys that I can judge that water level. And when I see a water at 367, I know exactly where it's at. It reflects I can remember what happened there. And some other details that are probably going to be noteworthy for your journal and being able to keep up with these river gauges is looking at the river gauge and how it pertains to maybe the boat ramp. If you were able to launch your boat easily, or if you wasn't able to launch it, or if there was maybe a ditch that you were having to wade across, and now the water's too deep and you can't wade it. That's all noteworthy stuff. And then really it's very simple. There's a lot of journals out there that's waterproof and all these fancy things, but just a little notepad in your blind bag will go a long ways. Has anybody got any questions so far? And then we're going to start diving into the different public land opportunities.
Hey, Chris, we got a couple of questions from Cody. His first one is like, when hunting public land, how far do you have to be away from a draw blind in order to hunt?
I'm going to reference you to the hunting and trapping guide. I think that it's 200 yards is the legal limit. But again, I would make sure to double check that, but I believe it's 200 yards.
And then he also asked, how far do you have to be away from the refuge?
To my knowledge, there's no, you just can't be on the refuge. You can't retrieve birds that fall on the refuge. You're not even supposed to send a dog onto the refuge, I don't think, because you could be, boogering waterfowl and stuff like that. So my answer to that would be, you want to be able to retrieve everything you kill, even birds that fall along. So to just use your best judgment there.
Yeah. And to Chris's point, a lot of times people refer to that refuge line as the firing line. Essentially, nothing can go on beyond that point, and those lines are usually pretty well marked by signs, depending if it's a federal or state refuge.
Anybody else? Okay, if we don't have any other questions, I'm going to jump right into other public land opportunities. And I've broken these down into 3 basic types. We've got season-long blind draws, 3 and 4 day site draws, and then our general boat and wade-in access areas. I'm going to start out by talking about the season-long blind draws and how it works and how to apply. When you are selected for one of these sites, you have access to that blind for the entire season. Hunters may apply for only one area, and then drawn hunters can have 7 buddies sign on and become card holders. And they can come and go to the blind just as the person that was successful. Historically, these drawings were done in person, but due to COVID, it went to an electronic virtual draw this year, and a lot of the proposals that's up in the air revolve around it kind of staying like that. You can apply at gooutdoorstennessee.com, and your application period is July 2nd to the 26th. And then when you're doing it electronically, you're able to choose your preference. So that what that's saying, choose 24 site locations in order by preference. My first choice would be my most sought after location. And my last choice would be the one that, you know, is not as sought after. So, and then the minimum age to apply is 16. A lot of this stuff is, as I discussed earlier, there's proposed changes that were talked about in the commission meeting, but the general principle of the draw is going to stay the same with some of these tiers. So also with season-long blind draws, you have permanent blind structures that are allowed. Just because they're allowed doesn't necessarily mean that there is a structure there. Normally the management area or the area managers will have a pretty good idea of which sites have a blind on it and which ones don't. But even if there is not a blind there, you're definitely welcome to build them for the season-long blind draws the way it stands right now. Your decoys can be left out for the entire season, and your blind construction date is the end of October, right there around the 26th. So hopping a blind can be hunted, means it can be hunted by anyone if a card holder is not present at shooting time. So what this means is this person who drew the blind side or one of the 7 sign-ons are not present, then you can jump in the blind. Be respectful of others and just make sure to, you know, that they could have decoys out or they could have some other gear in the blind. So make sure not to bother that stuff. By going to TWRA's website, you can see a full list of the season-long blind draws and find maps for area-specific information. So if we go down here and we was to click on Cheatham Lake, then it'll pull up, this is a PDF map, and you can see there in the legend, it's got different blind sites, it's got boat ramps, and it's got other areas that you can access to just wade in and boat hunt as well. Have you got any questions about the 60-day blind draw, the season-long blind draws, before we go into the 3 and 4 day? All right, guys, if you don't have any questions, we'll start into the next part of our access. Is 3 and 4 day site draws. It's similar to the season-long blind draws in a lot of ways, but you only have them for 3 and 4 days, and you can't put a permanent structure there. Hunters that are selected for a blind site may have up to 4 additional hunters, but in this case, the hunter that's successful has got to be present, so it don't have like a card holder system similar to the 60-day draws. On most all of these 3 and 4 day site draws right now, the waterfowl hunting ends at 3 p.m. But again, there's site specific information. You want to make sure that you check on that. And depending on the WMA, hunters may be able to leave their decoys out or their temporary structures for their assigned hunt dates. Again, each one is managed specifically and managed different. ATVs can be used to access these blind sites, but there's normally some standing crops, specifically in the ones in West Tennessee. So make sure you don't run over any standing crops whenever you're accessing that blind, because that would be considered baiting. Similar to the season-long draws, you've got, here's a screenshot of TWRA's website. You can click on each one and get more specific information, and you can get all your PDF maps and unit specific information. When a person's successful in drawing a 3 and 4 day site, but they can't make it, so they say that they don't confirm that they're coming, it goes into a leftover draw. So every Monday night during the season, leftover sites will be drawn in person. Because of COVID-19 this year, they've implemented what's called a drop box. So at each of those 3 and 4 day site locations, whether it be Gooch or Thorny or different ones, there's going to be an actual box. You put in a vacancy waterfowl hunt application, and then it's drawn, and you have to be there in person to be able to get that, or you'll be notified when if you're drawn for that. So personal information on there, your party members that you would like to have on there, hunt date, location, and then your preferences similar to the season long blind draw of 1 through 15. Any questions about the 3 and 4 day site draws? Okay, we'll move right along. We're going to talk about the boat and wade-in access areas, and this is probably the most popular among public land waterfowlers. And the simple reason being, there's no application, there's no specific dates in which you're kind of held to. And 3 of the most popular public land types is wildlife management areas, and each one of these are specifically managed. You got TBA properties that we talked about on our interactive maps. And then in West Tennessee, we have a series of national wildlife refuges that we also can hunt here. Regulations are specific to each refuge, and most of these refuges have waterfowl sanctuaries inside of them. So you definitely got to make sure you know where you are, because those sanctuaries are protected. And then basically with this style of hunting, all you need is the boat or waders and the proper gear and the knowledge to go get them. So.
Hey, Chris, before we get too deep into this, Joshua has a question. He asked, how competitive are the site draws with the season long and the 3 to 4 days?
There's probably some data out there about like specifically the one that was done virtually of kind of how many people applied. But it just really depends on the location. The ones in West Tennessee that I've been to, that there are several people there for the amount of blinds that's there. So your success rate is pretty slim. But I will say one of the things that was mentioned in the proposal, and there is already a preference point system for the 3 and 4 day draws, but it looks like we're going to go to a preference point system for all tiers. And what that means, if you're unsuccessful in drawing this year, it's going to make you that much more successful next year. And there's a lot of ways of using preference point systems. Different states do different things. Some increase your number of names in the hat, so to speak, as you go up in preference points. Others take from the top tier. In other words, if you're not at the top, so let's just say it's going to take 4 preference points to draw a blind, you really wouldn't stand a chance until you got to that tier, that one. If you have 1 or 2, you wouldn't draw. Where if it was just adding names to the hat, you could draw, but your chances would be better with more preference points.
And competitiveness, like Chris said, really depends on the location, because not all WMAs have the same number of draw blinds. Old Hickory, for example, in Middle Tennessee, I think has right at 100 draw sites, where a place like Cheatham Lake WMA has less than half that. So depending on where you're putting in is going to determine how competitive with just the amount of blinds that are available and how many people are putting in for the draw that given year.
Right. I hope that answered your question. And we're going to have some time at the end of this. If there's some questions that I don't answer throughout the virtual class, then we're going to have plenty of time for discussion towards the end. So I'm going to start in on the gear that you'll need for boat hunting. One of the biggest things is boat blinds can be a huge help as far as concealing your boat, but a lot of people have gotten by with camo netting, just stretching it across the boat and covering up shiny pieces of the boat, using natural structures to get the boat under. or obviously you can use the boat more as a means of transportation and hauling gear. You get to your hunt location, uh, and you go hide the boat and then stand beside some trees or different things like that. You're not having to hide the whole boat. My decoy setup for boat hunting is between 1 and 3 dozen weighted kill decoys. And what these are is they've got a kill that's got sand or some kind of weight in them. So you're able to throw them and have them set up correctly and stay that way. And I've got some here behind me that I'm going to show you at the end of this class. Also, I like to use strings that's long so I can adjust the water level by half hitching them around the keel. And then also, I always like to utilize a motion decoy. And because you've got room and you're not having to haul the gear, you can get away with carrying more stuff. So a motion decoy, a spinning wing type decoy. So the size of the boat is definitely going to affect the number of people and the amount of gear that you can safely carry on a hunt. And it's also going to affect the distance you can travel and the bodies of water that you can safely get on. You got to be extra careful. It's cold. And you obviously, if you get wet or you've got waders on and things like that, there's a lot of safety issues around that. But the wind and the current on these large rivers and lakes can definitely be unforgiving. And pictured here on the left, that's an actual boat blind set up there, and you can see how well it's concealed. And then on the right, that's one of the spinning wing decoys like I was referring to, and it actually floats. So again, it's real easy to use when you don't know what your water depth is going to be. So here's a little bit of gear that I use when wading. So I like to use chest waders instead of hip waders, just because if you're in shin deep water and you was to trip or something, if you got chest waders on, you're probably less likely to get wet. Where if you got hip waders on, obviously you went to your knees and now you're up to water to, your belly button, and you're going to be wet. So, and then chest waders have come a long ways. Now we have breathable chest waders that are pretty comfortable to wear, and they have a lot of uses. My decoys for wade hunting, normally I'm going to use a water kill decoy. And what this is it uses water inside that kill. And I'm going to use an example at the end of this class to show you guys as well. But it uses water to make that decoy set up right. And what that does is it makes the decoy a lot lighter. And then also I'm going to have shorter strings. Texas rigged strings Texas rigs is a good way of rigging up your decoys for wade hunting, just because you're going to be in fairly shallow water, because you're only going to be up to what you can wade in. Then the key to it is just keeping gear light and mobile. You can use a sled to be able to transport your gear in and out, and that's pictured there on the left. And then on the right here, that is one of the Texas rigs like I was talking about. So if you can imagine the way that would work, those clips are going to be clipped to your decoys. That carabiner is going to be able to go through those loops, and you're kind of able to haul them all at once, throw them over your shoulder, and they're real easy to pick up. You don't have to wrap them around the kill or wrap them around the head or something like that when you're done hunting. Does anybody have any questions? And then I'm going to start in on shotgun and ammo suggestions for waterfowl hunting. All right. I want to briefly discuss some of the shotgun and ammo suggestions for waterfowl. The most popular size shotgun for waterfowl hunting is 20 and 12 gauge. When you're hunting waterfowl, you have to use a plug which limits the gun to 3 shells. Probably the most popular chokes to use when waterfowl hunting is going to be modified to full chokes. And I've got a little bit of a picture that's going to illustrate kind of the way choke tubes work on the next slide. For ammo, if you look back into the 90s, a lot of research was conducted on how waterfowl and shorebirds can get lead poisoning from ingesting lead shot while feeding. So the nation went to a non-toxic only regulation to help prevent this. With that being said, the most popular type of shot now used for waterfowl is steel shot. So with steel shot being less dense than lead, it takes a little bit bigger pellet to make up that kinetic energy to be able to be lethal for waterfowl. So most people use a 3.5 inch load, and these loads are shooting between 1,200 and 1,500 feet per second. And then the most popular size steel shot for waterfowl is going to be BBs up to about a 3. A 3 is 3s, 1s, 2s are going to be for your ducks, and then BBs and maybe all the way up to a T for geese. So the top picture here illustrates the way choke tubes affect shotgun patterns. And you got a skeet choke tube as being the more open. And then just to run through them real quickly, improved cylinder, light modified, improved modified, and then a full choke being the most constricting pattern. So giving you a little bit more distance. And then also on the bottom, you can get an idea of the size of shot as compared to each other. You've got BBs right there on it, and you can compare the way they would look to a 2 or a 1. And again, 1s, 2s is where I'm at for ducks, and then BBs and Ts for geese is a pretty good rule of thumb. I want to touch on just a little bit about waterfowl specific regulations. Some of you guys might have hunted other game, and these are some things that's going to be a little bit different when hunting migratory birds and waterfowl. So each state is limited to 60 days of waterfowl hunting, and that's excluding the early wood duck and the early goose seasons. And then the state can decide how they want to spend those days. And as we discussed earlier, we have a 2-day split, and then we have a 58-day continuous season. Another thing that's specific to waterfowl hunting is your federal duck stamp. It's $25, and this is and the money from federal duck stamps goes directly back into the conservation of migratory birds. Also, wildlife management area permits. So if you're going to participate and hunt on your season-long blind draws, your 3 and 4 day site draws, or if you're just going to go and boat and wade in hunt on a wildlife management area, you're going to need a WMA permit. And then something else, shooting hours for waterfowl is 30 minutes before sunrise until sunset. And these charts can be found on your weather apps, and then also on the Go Outdoors Tennessee app.
Christy also makes a good point along the lines of you have to buy your federal duck stamp, but you also have to sign it as per the rules. They want to make sure you sign it, so you just can't pass off that duck stamp to anybody else that's hunting in your blind. So it's kind of a way to make sure everybody has their own.
That's right. And just remember, it's for a good cause. I know a lot of people that collect, and you can see federal duck stamp collections every year. Even though mine's got the face signed, I stick it on a board and collect every year's duck stamp. And they're always a lot of art went into them, and some people buy too just because it is a way of kind of giving back to the sport. So I know I've covered a lot of stuff, and I just want to tell you, Academy Sports and Outdoors, it's a great resource for finding a lot of the gear that I've talked about here tonight, and they're a great partner with the program, Hunting Fishing Academy. And then some of the questions that you guys have already asked, I really want to refer you back to the Hunting and Trapping Guide. This is a great resource for those rules and regulations. It's got a full list of your wildlife management areas, and it's going to get it a little bit more detailed on the area specific regulations. So I want to take this time, and if you guys got some more questions, I would love to answer those. A little housekeeping. We will be emailing a recording of tonight's class and some additional information about duck hunting and things like that. That'll be going out in the next couple of days. So if you guys can see me now, I wanted to go back and show you what I was talking about. So this is a water kill decoy, and you can see the way this is hollow. Water makes it float upright. It's very light compared to a weighted kill decoy. And you can see how this is solid and the weight is quite a bit different. And then the way that I always do my depth adjustment on my weights and my strings is this one's got one built into it. You can see this, but you can half hitch this, make a loop over the keel, pull it tight, and now I've adjusted for the water level that I want. And then you can just let more string off the keel to be able to get more out, and then half hitch it and pull it tight. And then one more thing I wanted to show you guys, talking about spinning wing decoys. This is another model that floats. This one actually splashes the water. So by splashing the water, it makes it look a little bit more real, like waterfowl that's moving and making ripples on the water. And then the flash, the white to a color, white color, this makes it look like ducks kind of stretching their wings on the water, and can really help to get the attention of birds to your decoy sets.
We got another question from Cody, Chris. He asked what we think a good number of decoys would be to throw out in East Tennessee, especially in areas where they might not have as many birds as what they do in West Tennessee.
Right. A lot of my number of decoys I'm going to use is going to be based on kind of the area I'm hunting. If I'm hunting trafficking birds, so in other words, birds that just flying over an area, I might use more decoys and harder calling. Where if I'm hunting where there's birds kind of already using and I'm almost done my scouting and I know birds are already coming here, whether I'm here or not, then I'll go to a smaller set. And you can get by with definitely smaller sets, and you can get by without things like spinning wing decoys. The only way that a bigger set, calling, and spinning wing decoys might come into play in a situation where you got birds coming, whether you're there or not, is going to be able to get them close. So if you were on a fairly, let's say you were on a 5 or 6 acre lake and you were set up in one end of it, and you wanted to draw them to that end, you might consider putting out a few more decoys in a situation like that. You guys got any more questions? Well, all right, guys, if you don't have any more questions, we're done here about 8 minutes early, and I'll let you guys get back to enjoying your night. Again,
hey, Chris, we actually just had a couple of questions come in real quick. Jake asked, what's a good way to ID ducks for beginners?
There's a lot of resources out there from Ducks Unlimited and different things that pertain to waterfowl. And you know, there's bird books out there, and you can buy them that's specifically for waterfowl. But really, there's a lot of resources. Ducks Unlimited's got some out there. You could probably, I know I've seen calendars, just placards that's got different species, and I've seen people even post them in a blind so they can make sure that they're staying inside the bag limits, because the bag limit is species specific. So if you think about that, you can kill 6 birds here, only 4 mallards, only 3 wood ducks, so on and so forth. So you got to really know what you're shooting and make sure you stay within your bag limits.
And I just shared a link with everybody in the chat. It's linked to a PDF that the Fish and Wildlife Service puts out. It's called Ducks at a Distance. It's a pretty good, handy book. And if you can find a hard copy, they're pretty small, so they fit in your blind bag very well, but very useful in helping identify birds by what they look like as they're flying through the air.
My
So
biggest,
that's a good.
yeah, and to touch on that, my biggest piece of advice is a lot of what I've talked about tonight is through experience. You're going to build this knowledge base, but when you see a mallard fly and you see the cadence of its wing beat, you see how fast it's moving, you see the size of it and the way it's shaped. Pay attention to that. And then once you've harvested one and you say, okay, this is a mallard, just think back about how that bird flew and how his wing beat was. Every bird has a little bit different speed on their wing beats, and they're all shaped a little bit different. And through time, you're going to be able to identify those species just by seeing a silhouette of a bird flying from a long distance.
And then Michael has asked if we have any suggestions on parking or interest areas. I think he's had some issues with getting to areas and gates being closed and things like that.
Yeah, each wildlife management area and different thing is going to be specific to. It's going to have regulations specific to that management area. So I don't have a lot of advice because it does fluctuate so much from place to place.
Our best advice on that, I know, Michael, you specifically named Percy Priest, is reach out to the wildlife management area manager. Manager's contact information is located in the hunting guide underneath that WMA. Give them a call. That's that's part of their job, is to inform people. So if you ask them, like, if you're going to be hunting a specific part of the WMA, they can tell you where to park your vehicle and things like that. And then Joshua asked, what should I do if I harvest a duck that's been banded? I was wondering when we get a banned question.
Yeah. So I think it's reportban.gov, and it's on the bird. 1-800-327-BAND is another way of reporting it by phone. But the band will have that information on it. And then it will also have, I believe it's a 9-digit number that will be unique to that bird. If you do it through the website, you can get normally, unless it's a very freshly banded bird, you're going to get a direct return on the information. So in other words, as soon as you submit it, you're going to be able to tell where it was banded and what year and which bander banded it, things like that. And you can also request a certificate. So killing a banded bird is kind of the trophy of the duck world, and you can get a certificate and obviously keep the band as a trophy.
And then our last question comes from someone asking, how can we increase the amount of birds and the decoys in East Tennessee? I think if Chris and I knew the answer to that question, we'd be very rich men.
Well, I'm going to give a very vague piece of advice. I think in East Tennessee, I think it's more important than ever to be able to scout and do your diligence to be able to find locations birds are using. West Tennessee, you have so many birds that's flying that Mississippi flyway that's flying high, and you're able to traffic birds. In East Tennessee, I think the time that you put in scouting and finding areas that birds are loafing in is going to pay dividends when it comes time to actual hunt. Does that look like all the questions, Taylor?
I think that's it. That's all that I have. Some of y'all typing in the chat box, thanking us. We really want to say thank y'all for attending tonight. Thanks for bearing with us. And like Chris said, we're going to be sending out some emails to y'all with a lot of the links that we talked about tonight so y'all can go access the resources that Chris used when putting this presentation together. And then in the next day or so, we'll also be sending a link to the recording of this webinar so y'all can go back and reference it anytime in the future. But we really appreciate it. And if nobody has any other questions, we'll let y'all go for the night.